Dr. Tiala Dapo. I am the Vice President of the Board. President Warner is en route, but he will be late this morning. We're going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to begin. And since I have the first report, it will be a very quick report. Committee on Accessible Transportation continues to meet. Board members, you do have a copy in your other packet that was on the table this morning. CAT continues to give its input around issues that are dealing with accessibility, with the new light rail vehicles that are coming in, and now beginning to talk about accessibility into the Portland streetcar, and we'll be continuing to get updates on that. There's nothing else to report. They will continue with their recommendations of their work plan into the year 2014. Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, we'll move to our next report. Board report of Transit Equity Advisory. Consuelo Sornosa is not in today, and Neil McFarland will give us a brief report on that.
Yes, Mr. Board Vice President, just to note that the TAC did review the Title VI program at its last meeting. You might recall the issues related to timing, and they did concur in the report and the recommendations. They also reviewed the service enhancement plan effort that's underway around the region, and actually will be helping us develop outreach programs and other suggestions to make sure that we reach fully into the community, all aspects of our community, as we develop those service enhancement plans. Regarding the Title VI work, and I think we've shared with you a letter from TAC Chair Catherine Sherrill in the past. Basic suggestion is to bring future mitigation items before the TAC for input prior to any board adoption, and that we begin to pilot internally some different equity analysis thresholds, begin to see if there's a noticeable difference in using those different thresholds. So we're going to do that administratively as we do Title VI analysis. Concludes my report, and if there are any questions, staff or I could respond.
No questions. Metro Policy Advisory Committee, Craig Prosser. And
Mr. Vice President, members of the board, the Metro Policy Advisory Committee is meeting tonight. It generally meets the same days as this board does. Last week, or excuse me, our last meeting, we did receive a status report on impacts, or excuse me, Metro's work on climate smart communities, and that discussion will continue tonight, as it will into January, as the region starts looking, honing down the strategies that the region needs to take to meet the legislature's goals on reducing carbon imprint in the state. At this point, it looks like we will be able to meet the goals based on a scenario that really is built off of existing plans and policies that are currently in place in the region. But there is some tweaking that needs to be done on that, and that was done as a snapshot in time in some of the efforts that were currently underway. Now, we're not at that time that started, so there'll be some tweaking that will be going on that, but it's looking fairly positive. Also tonight on the agenda, they're going to be briefing MPAC on a letter that Metro will be sending to Congressman Earl Blumenauer. He is proposing to introduce a piece of legislation in the U.S. Congress. I need to read this to get it right. So he's going to introduce the Update, Promote, and Develop America's Transportation Essentials Act, which is called the Update Act. And that would basically to address some of the issues in the Highway Trust Fund, which is currently in pretty bad shape. This is the Federal Highway Trust Fund. And the legislation proposes an increase in the federal gas tax, indexing that rate to inflation, and I think most, from my standpoint, most importantly, is starting to look at alternatives to the gas tax as our nation moves to more fuel-efficient vehicles, and changing our driving habits. That the gas tax is not producing the amount of revenues needed to really maintain our infrastructure. So they'll be looking for a recommendation from Impact to the Metro Council to send a letter of support to Congressman Blumenauer. So that's what's on tap at Impact.
Joe?
Yeah, Craig, well, one of my other hats is I sit on the Drive Oregon to promote the electrical vehicle industry and charging infrastructure. Is that part of what you all discuss over there?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Is as we do move to other alternate fuels and electric vehicles, obviously gas consumption is dropping. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Prosser. And again, Board Member Prosser, Finance and Audit.
The Finance Committee met this morning. We had most of the agenda was really focused on a first look at the upcoming financial forecast, going over some of the assumptions and preliminary conclusions. It is looking like we're making progress, and of course depending on the assumptions used for the forecast. So we gave some feedback to staff and looking at issues on how we do. The forecast is built looking at the current status quo, particularly with our employee compensation packages, and then comparing that to TriMet's proposal at the bargaining table. So that does create some variation in the forecast in which way we go on that, but currently it's looking hopeful. So.
No questions. We're going to bypass our strategic financial plan. President Warner said he wanted to make that presentation, and he hasn't arrived as of yet, but we will hold that until his arrival. So we will move to item number 2 on the agenda, General Manager report, General Manager Neil McFarland.
Thank you, Board President Bethel and members of the board. I did want to just update on a few items. First thing that I wanted to note is that I've initiated, with the help of our great staff, review of our MAX system maintenance policies and procedures. This is an independent review that will be conducted by LTK individuals that are not directly involved in our system, but an outside look, I think, is actually a very helpful thing as we begin to put our budget proposals together for the next year. We begin to actually invest much more heavily in our maintenance efforts and our rehabilitation efforts, and the last budget did begin to reflect that, and I believe our customers will begin to see the progress of that. But as you all know, we do have an aging system, and a great example of that is our Type 2 and Type 3 light rail vehicles. Were all built around the same time. They're coming due for midlife rehabilitation and a great deal of additional maintenance. And the same thing is true of our rail infrastructure. Now, we have a great staff that do a great job every day in preserving these assets and working on these assets, but what we really wanted to do was get an outside look and evaluation of, for example, our protocols related to preventive maintenance and looking at our rehabilitation schedules related to each of the assets in turn. And so this outside review, I think, will help us do that. We've asked particularly for updates related to staffing sizes and investment profiles related to this to help us with the budget in next year, so make sure that we are right sized and right and financed properly to make sure that we maintain the reliability of our system over the long haul. And I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of the size of this effort on a regular, ongoing basis. But remember, we have 127 light rail vehicles, more coming before the Milwaukee project, 102 miles of overhead electrical and track, 144 switches in our system, 314 signals and hundreds of component communication signals. and 58 different substations. So there's a lot, and one of the things that I would have asked is related to each of those assets. What is the right preventive maintenance schedule? What is the right rehabilitation schedule? And what is the right investment profile as we look forward? We're looking for outside help for, number one, making sure that we bring the best practices of the whole industry forward here at TriMet. And number two, frankly, we don't have the staff internally that I think are capable of doing this, so our staff will clearly be heavily invested and involved in this review. And I think this review has been very well received by our staff, noting that it's very important, and every time we do some sort of review, we learn something new, and that's an important thing to maintain the reliability of the system. The review has a not-to-exceed cost of $245,000. This will be managed in a task order basis, so we'll try to manage below that. But just to put that in perspective, the budget for maintenance away and rail equipment maintenance departments is over $36 million a year. So a little bit of insurance to sort of make sure that we're really sizing that and aiming those efforts in the right direction seems like a very wise move to me. LTK will provide us recommendations, again, on maintenance procedures, training programs, staffing levels, and any particular systems that need repair or upgrade in the very short term. We'll have a full report in 6 months, but as I noted, we'll have reviews ongoing along the way and input into the budget process along the way. So any questions board members may have on that topic?
Great. Who do I talk to today? Which guy? Yes. Very quickly. Will the TriMet staff be able to augment some of their, help them out, I guess?
Oh, absolutely.
The outsiders,
and we'll be absolutely fully engaged and involved at all levels in this review.
And the second thing, if I may?
Sure.
All right. I would be very interested in what other type of apprenticeships, training programs they have around the country of a city, agency of this size.
Right. Well, we'll make sure to answer that question.
Thank you.
If I might continue then, I did want to bring to your attention a memo in your packet that's right after the monthly performance report. And what I will begin to do for you regularly and related to transparency of our actions is to provide you a quarterly update on any major personnel actions with non-union employees above grade 15. In this memo, for example, for the first quarter of this year, there were no such actions. For the second quarter of this year, there was a series of 7 which are detailed in that packet. This is not for board action. All of these actions are filling vacancies or making some important changes within budget and sort of managing the key personnel. And we chose to report on grade 15 and above because those are the positions that are managing programs or people or budgets, and so those I think are the key positions related to the non-union staff as we move ahead. A reminder, there's no across-the-board raises for non-union employees during fiscal 14, and any future increases will be subject to the considerations during the budget. I would also note that if there was any associated with any of the positions, if there were budget changes required, we would obviously come to you with budget authorization before we did that. But these changes are all within current budget authorization. I also note that any salary adjustments are made with full knowledge of what the comparables are related to comparable agencies and positions, both in our marketplace as well as our competitive marketplaces. And it's important to make sure that we maintain the excellence of the TriMet staff at all levels. So with that, unless there's any questions, I'll just move on to the next topic, which is mobile ticketing. And this is a little happy note, I think, at the end of the year, is that we had broken through the 50,000 mark related to downloads of the app. And again, the business plan for Globe Sherpa called for them to download something like 30,000 by the end of the year. So we're well ahead of that and our projections for that. And I think it is a testament to how easy it is to use. We're beginning to see it in the system a lot. Actually, as my conversations with many operators and looking actually, we're beginning to see a lot and actually feel that it's a very good augmentation of our otherwise paper-oriented system. Related next topic, bridge naming. Our committee is reviewing the 9,500 submissions during that 6-week process of soliciting from the public potential names of the bridge. This marked the first time in our region's history where we actually asked the public for name suggestions for a bridge. We expect that the committee will narrow down the list, and the final, if you will, narrow list will be submitted to the public on January 16th, and then we'll have a period of time where we'll be able to solicit public feedback on that list between January 16th and March 1st. And then the committee will forward its top recommendations after they hear from the public in the second round. And again, my thanks to Board Member Stovall for his participation in that effort. There's a lot of names. And Mr. President, that concludes my remarks, and welcome.
Thank you so much. You have a question, please?
If I can recommend, when you're going through the choices of names, there was one name out of the last you probably don't want to use. The bridge should know where. Just my opinion.
So is it Director Stovall, we need to get our recommendations too? Is that what we do?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And please text them to me.
Which will all become part of the public record, by the way.
Are you saying 9,500 wasn't enough?
All right, so does that conclude your report, Mr.
That
Wallace?
does, yes.
All right. So should we move on then? Let's give further questions to the accident review process. Harrison Porter?
Yes, this hearing's coming up. We just note that in this month's safety update, we've asked Harry to go over the accident review process, and this is a very important part of our overall safety program, and has involvement of staff at all levels. And I'll let Harry go through the rest of it.
Good morning, President Warner and other board members.
And why don't we?
So this morning, what I'd like to do is go through quickly through the accident review process, but I also want you to understand that there is a very formal process that TriMet has for managing risks in general. This includes the identification of hazards, the analysis of those particular hazards, then beginning to develop mitigation measures, implement them, and then to reassess them. But despite all of these efforts, mishaps do happen, and we begin to investigate the causes for those, analyze them, and then develop solutions for their reoccurrence, to prevent reoccurrence rather. So what is the mechanism for that? Well, one mechanism is that when there is a collision, we have two different bodies that convene to look at those particular collisions. These bodies are chaired by the safety department and then comprised of operators for those respective areas and training staff, and then they look at the circumstances using National Safety Council guidelines and then determining whether or not there is preventability. But we also look at it to see whether or not there are other factors that maybe have been involved, and then begin to develop mitigation measures as a result of that. Another process that we have is something called the Transit Change and Review Committee. This group convenes and looks at a variety of safety issues, but we also do look at major incidents and then begin to look at trends across the board. This particular committee is chaired by myself and is comprised of executive directors and mid-level managers. And we really drill down to look at those root cause analyses and look at what can be done to improve the situation. Because there may be some organizational issues that need to be addressed, as well as perhaps making some changes to the technology or mechanical mechanisms of some of the systems. And then there's still another layer, and that is that if there is an employee injury, supervisors and managers do initiate an investigation of that. There is quite a bit of assistance from the safety staff as well. Those particular circumstances are addressed by the safety committees themselves as well, and these are obviously comprised of employees. The committees also review and analyze trends. All of this information now is being collected into a new software package that we recently procured, and this enables us to begin to track much more closely the hazards that have been identified and the mitigation measures, and then hopefully this will ultimately result in a downward trend of mishaps. And that's the process very quickly. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Harry, I want to emphasize, I can't emphasize enough, if you could have the staff, the members who work on electrical systems, get a thorough review of the hazards. We just lost one of our members dead, killed, shot, fell off. So, we haven't had a long time. And so, those of you who don't get involved in this stuff, it happens very quickly. And we all sometimes get a problem at home, or you're late for this or that, and you lose attention. You forget what's there. So I'd be willing to offer our services. We have a member who works for the contractor, works for the school on safety. Recognized expert. I'm just putting that out there. We'd be willing to set something up and no funds on the funerals. So thank you.
Harry, this safety management information system, how long have you had that in place?
We just purchased the program this summer, and we are beginning to populate it with all of the identified hazardous conditions and situations, so that is ongoing. We recently trained our maintenance staff on how to use this system, the managers and the supervisors. So, and that is ongoing. There's an implementation schedule then to begin to train the transportation side of the house within the next couple of months or so.
So have you gotten any results out of it yet?
No, and as you can see by this graph, or this particular slide, there are a series of dashboards, and these dashboards are being created. We are also working with our data analysts to help us develop other dashboards as well. I plan to present to you those dashboards in future meetings, and because these are really the benchmarks that we're going to be using to define whether or not our efforts are effective and successful.
Well, I really applaud you, moving forward with this type of information system. It seems to me like one of the key elements of any safety program has got to be, good data on where your incidents are occurring, what type of incidents, and so you can start identifying patterns and that type of thing makes it a lot easier to be proactive. So I appreciate very much that you're being proactive in getting this kind of system forward so you can do exactly that.
And that information will be shared with the board in future meetings. Great.
Harry, in regards to the collection review and appeals boards, and then as we move to the transit change and review committee, I'm assuming that findings that come from the review of collisions and things like that then go to the transit change and review committee as things need to be adjusted or looked at and changed?
Yes, that's exactly the process.
So in that regard, I see that operators and trainers are part of the collision review and appeals process, but I don't see that same level of engagement on the transit Change and Review Committee. Are operators and folks like that engaged in that part of the process too?
Not directly on that particular group, because those are decisions usually made to organizational processes. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any sort of involvement, but at this stage we currently don't involve that level. We do use safety committees to involve and engage the employees, and managers do sit on those committees as well. So the information is that we collect at the TRC level, the Transit Change and Review Committee level, gets pushed down to the safety committees as well, and then those managers that sit at the safety committee level push it upward to the TCRC level as well.
So they get a chance to review kind of what the TCRC is reviewing, and then give their input, and then it goes back to the TCRC for that kind of
That's what we
review.
attempt to do. Is it always 100% successful? No, but that's what we're attempting to do, is push it up and downward. Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
So here, I just want to make sure I understand this. So on the collision review and appeals board, I guess if you have a craft board, I guess. That's mainly focused at collisions and the vehicles? Or I'm just wondering things like the issues we've had with drivers being injured as a result of assaults, or some work-related practice. Where do those things start out? Is that here or someplace else?
That is typically at the safety committee level.
Okay. And then if it's major enough, it'll make its way up to the Transit Change and Review Committee?
That's correct.
Okay.
But we also looked at overall trends at the Change Review Committee level, just as the safety committees do.
Okay.
Can you tell me offhand, I know it's short notice, how many injuries are related to soft tissue injuries? What they call soft tissue injuries?
The vast majority are related to soft tissue. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's probably around the 80% mark.
80%?
Yes. So a lot of it is related to the operators,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of push-pull.
Well, I really hope that, well, I've been working with Commissioner Novick on giving him some information on helping him cut down on some of this. This very, okay, we'll talk about that.
So we're attempting to do the same thing. We've gone through an ergonomic review of the bus operators compartment. We're beginning to move towards making some changes in that area.
And the people in the maintenance field, people the mechanics who are stooped over all day, and
Those are all issues. And we also have now initiated a very formal job hazard analysis process, which I believe you're very familiar with.
okay. All right, thank you.
And so when can we expect the first reports from this system to be in front of us?
I would say within the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay. Good. And that'll be helpful to see all what's
We
being
can
tracked.
begin to show you some of the information that we collected and what some of those trends are.
Other questions? Thank you. More to come. Thank you very much. All right, so now we're beginning our financial professionals informational discussion on a few topics. Mr. General Manager, did you want to introduce this?
Yes, if I could, please, President, members of the board, we have a special presentation for you, as I think you've alerted the board members to in the past meeting. This is our experts on transit pension and other post-employment benefits, otherwise known as OPEB. These obligations and the corresponding funding plans will be a critical component of really all of the decisions we make on related to financial planning. It will affect the strategic financial plans, labor proposals and negotiations, our long-range financial planning, and that ends up affecting obviously the service levels for fiscal year 15 and above. pension and OPEB decisions also affect our debt policy and our funding policy. So these are all very important considerations as we begin to put our policies together. I'd also just note in the last couple of weeks there was an interesting court decision related to Detroit bankruptcy, and while there's no parallels in that regard from us, one of the interesting things about the court decision is that it really emphasized that the protections for the employees of a well-funded trust is really how benefits are protected. And so I have said for a long time, and related particularly to our pension, that funding these trusts is really a key element of both what we owe our employees and our long-term financial stability. So you'll hear a little bit more of that from our experts here. Again, we're very pleased to have experts who can look at this from a variety of areas: accounting, medical benefit design, healthcare actuarial services, and asset management and funding. So let me introduce the panel. First of all, you all are aware of Nancy Young, who leads our annual audit procedures. She'll talk a little bit about the accounting standards that we must adhere to as a government agency. Carrie Johnson actually is with Mercer and is involved in our healthcare plans and designs and marketing those plans. Michael Shunning with Chiron, Michael, in the middle there, will talk a little bit about the OPEB actuarial accounting issues. And John Linder, who will really talk more about the pension and trust establishment that are the basis of really sound financial planning and good benefits for employees. And obviously, Dave Oxia and Randy Stedman, if you have particular questions that relate to the specifics of the kind of situation that our outside experts may not be familiar with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
What I'm going to do this morning is just briefly cover just a couple of changes in the GASB requirements, as well as talk to you.
Give me 1 second, I'm sorry.
We might not be hooked up.
I'm sorry, it's troubleshooting. We got difficulty there.
Never still a little cold.
Yes, it is.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Is this better?
Huh?
Or is this better? Are we good there? Okay. So what I'm going to do this morning is talk to you about the GASB, the changes in your financial reporting requirements. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of best practices that we're seeing with other governmental entities. In the past, the GASB said, hey, take those liabilities for your pension and disclose that information in the notes to the financial statements. And so if a person could read that far back without falling asleep, they might come to that information, you have a better understanding of what your future obligations were. And then GASB has issued some other statements, GASB 45, and then most recently GASB 68. And those changes over time, what has happened is that they said, okay, well, you need to figure out how much you need to fund in the current year. And if there's a portion of that funding in the current year that you are not meeting, you're not paying, that piece needs to be reported in the financial statements, but the true obligation is still in the back and then it's in the financial statements. Now, most recently, when you look at the accounting standards that have come out, specifically GASB 68 and others to follow, they say no longer is that acceptable. We want to see the whole liability on the face of your financial statements. That's a big number for TriMet. You have union and non-union, you have your pension, and then you have your OPEB, those other post-employment benefits. And when we think of OPEB, we're talking about medical insurance and life insurance going forward. When you look at those numbers, they're pretty big, and they want them to be on the face of the financial statements, which flows down to the net position category, and it significantly affects what you have for unrestricted and restricted funds in that category. And so when you look at that and the changes that it's requiring, and you're looking at having to have that in the face of your financial statements, it brings about what you should be doing for best practices. So the first thing that I would talk to you about is making sure that you have formally adopted a funding policy that provides reasonable assurance that the pension promises can be paid, that the employer costs can be managed, and the plan is clearly communicated to everyone. In other words, we're going to demonstrate accountability and transparency in our activities. The second best practices would be to base your funding policy on an actuarially determined contribution, and that contribution is looked at on a periodic basis, at least biannually. Third, making a commitment to fund at least the pension actuarially determined contribution as you're going forward. And this is something that TriMet has been doing for a number of years, and so we encourage you to continue to do that. It's very important because paying that annual contribution is an important measure of whether or not the pension plan is on track to be funded. So when you look at that, some of the things that you are challenged with is that you have your current obligation, what should we fund this year, and then you have that unfunded portion. So when you're looking at that unfunded portion is going to be caught up over time. It's not realistic to do it overnight. It would be nice if you could, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long period of time. Looking at a 30-year benchmark, I think you're about 5 years into that process. The next best practice is looking at that actuarially determined contribution and making sure that it's calculated in a manner to fully fund your long-term costs as promised in your pension benefits. Making sure that your contributions are stabilized. In other words, there's a smoothing effect over time to take care of fluctuations that occurs. And then making sure that you're allocating the costs over the employee's period of active service. In other words, we want current employees, current activities to be funding our obligations, not tomorrow's activities to fund current obligations. So when you look at that, the board having an approved pension funding plan, which my understanding is that's going to be coming to the board here in the next several months. In addition to that plan, just demonstrating good, prudent financial management that lays out your plan to fund the pension over time. It also provides guidance in making your budget decisions, as well as reassures the bond rating agencies of TriMet's creditworthiness. Some of the things that we're also seeing with our other clients is an evaluation of what are the eligibility requirements and what are the benefits that are going to be received going forward. And there's changes being made in there. And I know that TriMet has already looked at reducing and has changed the rate of return for both the management and the union plans, as well as updating the life expectancy tables. So as you go forward and you're looking at these things, you have a lot of decisions to make that have a big impact to your bottom line of the financial statements. And here's the things about the GASB. You have to follow that guidance. Failure to do so puts us as your auditors in a position that would put us in a position that we might not be able to issue an unmodified opinion. And then, of course, the ramifications of that, are significant. So we strongly encourage TriMet to continue to follow the GASBs as they've been doing, and for the board to look at that funding plan as you go forward. I'd like to turn it over to Carrie.
Here today to talk to you about your home care plans and some challenges that you're facing in this area as well. The first piece is the value of your home care plans, and value can be defined a few different ways. The first one is the actuarial value. This is what insurance companies would use, what Mercer would use to determine the value of your plans. It looks at the member cost share of claims that come through, so how much are they paying for co-insurance, deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, those kind of things. What it doesn't take into account is who's paying what portion of the premium. So this is really based on the claim value of the plan and not who's paying what percent of premium out of payroll contributions. There's also a perceived value of the plan, and that is when you start to take into account what your members are looking at. So employees and their dependents that are enrolled in the plan. What value to them differs greatly by employee. Some of the things that they would consider is what provider or network you're using. Is their doctor on it? The choice and breadth of covered benefits. The plan share of claims costs that we mentioned around the actuarial value, and then also how much they're paying out of their payroll contributions for the coverage. TriMet currently offers 2 types of plans, PPO or Preferred Provider Organization. That's with Regents. It's a network of providers that if you go see them, they have agreed to, with their insurance company, to provide discounts, prior authorization arrangements, and no balance billing to members. So if they agree to a discount with Regents, for example, That's all the doctor gets. They don't get to come back after members to collect any unpaid balance. And they also offer non-network benefits, which means if your provider is not on the network, they can go see them, but their benefits are reduced, and they could have liability to that provider. HMO, Health Maintenance Organization, this is Kaiser for you. It's a closed network of physicians, hospitals, labs, and pharmacies. There's generally not an out-of-network benefit. The exception being for emergencies or if you're out of the service area and something would come up for the members. The utilization in an HMO is generally more tightly managed than in a PPO arrangement. So quickly touching on how TriMet's plans kind of compare to the market. And the market can be defined in a number of ways as well. So just starting with how it compares to plans in the general market, what we see in commercial business, private and public sector. Very positive in that you have lower deductibles, lower co-insurance requirements, lower out-of-pocket maximums and pharmacy cost sharing, and low or no payroll contributions for the plans. It compares favorably to public employers. We've looked at a number of local public employers that have PPO plans that compare with deductibles ranging from $0 to $500. TriMet's currently at $150. Co-insurance ranges from 10 to 20%. TriMet's currently at 10%. Out-of-pocket maximums that range from $1,000 to $5,000. TriMet's currently at $1,500. And contributions, which I mentioned just previously, is that all of the employers that we're looking at for their most generous plans do have some level of employee contribution in their paycheck. Right now, the union doesn't pay anything for their coverage, and the non-union has a 6% contribution. Another comparison is to transit agencies. And what we've shown here is the federal AV, which is actuarial value. This is based on a calculator that was produced according to the Affordable Care Act to develop what level of coverage is being provided. So we took the benefit plans for these organizations, put them into the federal calculator, and developed the actuarial value for those. And what you can see here is that TriMet's union plan is currently just under 92%. The non-union plan is at 86%. I should mention this is also just for the PPO plans, not the HMO. There's several comparable transit agencies here, ranging from a high of 92.7 to a low of 83, or 82.3, I should say. So TriMet compares very favorably. This does, again, not take into account any contributions. So when you take into account that the contributions for TriMet employees are low, it makes these values richer from an employee perspective. So part of the Affordable Care Act that hasn't yet got a lot of attention because it's been in the news for all of the stuff going in 2014 is the excise tax that is going to be applied for some call it Cadillac tax plans or high-end plans. And what this is doing is that in 2018, there will be an excise tax on the value of that plan or the cost of that plan that exceeds certain thresholds. And for 2018, the thresholds are $10,200 for a single and $27,500 for a family. What we're showing here is just the medical premiums for 2014. So we're not including any dental, any flexible spending account, vision, that kind of thing. So this is just the premiums for the Regents PPO and the Kaiser HMO. And what you can see is that in some cases, the current threshold is exceeded already. So if you take, for example, the Regents PPO for the union, the current annual premium is just over $10,000. So we're pretty close to what it could be in 2018 without having an excise tax. So with additional 4 years of medical inflation that might occur, we certainly have a concern.
We can hear you though.
Okay, okay.
Speak loudly, maybe some members of the audience can hear you too.
So the excise tax, I did want to clarify that the excise tax itself is 40% of the value over those thresholds. So it's not of the entire amount, but just those that are over the threshold. So what's driving the cost for TriMet? I thought we would walk through a number of different issues here. Demographics certainly plays in. As you can see on the left, we're just looking at your Regents active employees and the Kaiser enrolled active employees. So the average employee age for the union on the Regents plan is 51.6%. It's 50.5 years for the non-union, and the benchmark for Regents is 45.4. A difference of nearly just over 6 years can be a pretty significant difference in driving claims cost. We've also shown average member age, and when we look at members, that's your employees, their spouses or domestic partners, and any kids that they might have. Another key factor is average contract size. So what this means is the number of noses or belly buttons that are enrolled per employee. So if I have a family of 5, that would be 5.0. A single person enrolled would be 1. So on average, your contract size in the union is 2.3. It's 2.4 for the non-union. And for the Regents benchmark, it's just over 2. And then you can see the corresponding numbers on the Kaiser side. Male and female makeup can have some impact, but we're kind of hovering all around the same 50-50%, so I don't know that that's having much of an impact. I did want to talk a little bit about the average contract size and why that's important. What we've shown here is for the most recent 12-month period of paid claims, what the average cost is for an employee, a spouse, or their dependent children in this case. And you can see that the spouses are higher cost than the employees themselves. That statistic is not unusual. Generally speaking, we see spouses have higher costs than the employees. Could speculate about why that is, but I think it's probably different by each employer group. And then you can see that dependents, children generally, are much less costly than adults. Other cost drivers, the rich plan design with Regents, and what we've shown here is again looking at for every $1 million of claims that's submitted to Regents, after the provider discounts are applied, making sure that the claims are valid claims. The union cost sharing prior to the benefit change that was made in September of 2012 was 3.2% of cover charges. After that change in plan design, it went up to 8.1%. So we made a pretty good jump there in how much the members are paying for claims that come through the system. And then if we compare that to the Regents book of business, in 2011 it was 12.4%, and 2012 it's 12.3%. So although TriMet made some significant progress in kind of coming in line with the commercial business, it still trails what we're seeing for Regents generally. One of the things around a rich plan design where members are not paying out of pocket for their claims is that they can lose sight of the cost of care that they're getting. So they're not as aware of going to an emergency room versus a physician's office. If it's the same cost to them, they go where it's more convenient and spend less time thinking about the cost implications of that. Another potential issue is occupation. I know there's been some discussion about the risk occupation of the transit workers. And I'm certainly not in a position to talk about that risk. That's not my expertise. What I would say is that the Affordable Care Act called out several occupations that they consider high risk. And those thresholds that I mentioned previously can be higher for this subset of employers or employees. So that includes law enforcement, fire, emergency medical outside of the hospital, so paramedics, longshoremen, construction, mining, etc. So transit was not included in that. So we wanted to look at the utilization. I mentioned when employees start to have more out-of-pocket costs, they pay attention to what their utilization patterns are where they can. And we're showing two different tables here. The top table is the per member per month claims cost. And the bottom table is the admissions or cases or services per 1,000 members. We look at that per 1,000 members to get rid of any variances in the number of employees that are covered. So that kind of stabilizes the results. So I wanted to talk actually about the lowest table first. And what we're showing here is the utilization prior to the union plan design change and then post the union plan design change. So from 2011 to 2012, the first row, you can see that there were 88.2 inpatient admissions per 1,000 members. In 12 to 13, that's dropped to 73.9 or a 16.3% change. Now, I would caution that I think inpatient is not necessarily where members have an influence.